Hello everybody, I'm Matt Anderson and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way and you can too. Very excited to introduce our guest today, Jerry Macnamara. And Jerry, I'll probably let you introduce yourself to the audience to sort of give us some background about yourself.
And that really drove me forward in life to really create a framework for success. And it's been a lot of fun. You know, my personal vision in life is to help people in business succeed. And as I look at the opportunity to do that, it's given me lots of opportunities to lead people. I tell people all the time, no one loves their people harder than I do. And that is my first value. And then when you look at the outputs of that, I mean, I've never really been the technical leader in any business that I've run, but, you know, ran a retail franchise company that went from 5.9 million to 15 million in 18 months, made the franchise 500 twice, got a visa to go to Canada and lead a company up there, came back and started an e-commerce company at the dawn of the internet, ended up selling that after 8 years, was brought in to run a construction company, made the Business Journal list 3 times, the Inc. Fastest growing private companies twice, was voted a 40 under 40 and an ultimate CEO. And so all of those things are really the output of putting together a framework where you have clarity in where it is that you're going and that you love your people along the way. So it's been a fun career so far. It's not something that you can make up. 5 different industries, 5 different really careers.
That's fantastic. So excited to hear some best practices from you shortly. You know, in terms of getting out of your own way, I mean, clearly you weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth. If you had to pick one thing that's perhaps most helped you in terms of getting out of your own way or handling adversity, what would you say that is?
So, you know, there are 3 very seminal moments that I can think of in my life growing up that really have, you know, formed the stage for me. And that is one, my brother failed out of college, went and served in the Navy. We were roommates. And even though he was 8 years older than me, he gave me the best advice that I've ever received in my life. And that was learn from my mistakes because I made them for you. And as a very young person, I think I was 11 or 12 at the time, I just thought, shit, I don't have to make all these mistakes and get my teeth bashed in. I just have to be really aware of what's going on and say yes to this, no to that. And so I prided myself on being very, very attentive to what was going on in the landscape of the world. I didn't have to feel the bumps and bruises of all of those things. I could internalize how other people were approaching the world and what worked. The second piece that I think about was really the decision to leave home. And so out of that, you know, it became very clear to me that the healthiest thing for me to do was to leave. But I call it the 4 C's, and it is choice. Life is a choice you make. The second is control. When you really look at things, there is an internal or an external locus of control. Either you impact the world or the world impacts you. To say that differently, I call it, are you either going to be Buzz Lightyear or are you going to be Eeyore? And so what's your approach in that? And then the third piece is really, it's up to you to create the world that you want to live. And so there's no one else that's responsible for that than you. And when you live those 3 C's, the choice, the control, the create, out of that comes confidence because you're making promises to yourself that you're keeping on a daily basis. You create this amazing positive spiral of performance. You feel like you're in the driver's seat and you're living your life on your terms. And life becomes really, really, really fun. And so that was really what I thought about in leaving home, because I certainly could have made lots of bad choices. No one knew whether I showed back home to my apartment or not. I could have been the kid that didn't do well in school, that stayed out all night, that did drugs. And my vision for the world was bigger and better than that. And really it became because I made this promise to myself. And it was that I was going to live a life where my legacy was love, and I was going to positively impact the world. And that's a promise that I've been chasing since the day I left, which was April 4th, 1991. And I've never given that up.
I want to stop you for a second there, Jerry. So is it, I've got to ask this. So you said your legacy is love and making a positive impact in the world. I've got to ask this. I mean, is that sort of the opposite of what you grew up with or how it felt at the time?
No. So, my parents were both sick, had addictions. At their core, they're wonderful people. I mean, I didn't see my mom from the time I was 15 till I was almost 31. But my mom is one of the most amazing, positive people in the world. They just weren't in a position to be on my board of directors as a young person. And so I was lucky. I stand on the shoulder of giants because I grew up in a community where people cared and loved me. I've never done anything in my life alone. And so, no, I don't think it's the opposite. Quite opposite. It was the foundation of the way I was raised. But when you have addiction, you're not loving yourself, and so it's hard to love those people around you in the way that you want to.
This isn't a crucial question, but I'm just curious. I mean, briefly, where did you go when you left home?
So, I stayed in the same town. I moved into town over top of a flower shop, which simply meant that when I went out on dates, I had the best flowers to take to the ladies I was taking out, because Flower Designs by Nancy always took good care of me. And so, my dad helped me. He rented the apartment. I worked too for my spending money. I cut a deal with the downstairs neighbor who ran a pizzeria. And so I learned negotiation as a young person. I got pizzas, large pizzas for $5. That lasted me 2 days. And, but yeah, my dad generally was not around all the time. And so.
And this will sound like a wild jump in terms of the conversation, and maybe that's just, but it's important for me. What I'm noticing with my podcast interviews is people's stories when they come from, a rough childhood by most people's standards. The consistency of that almost makes me wonder if people that didn't have a rough childhood, that actually had a, reasonably comfortable middle class upbringing,
Sure.
How many people you meet at the top that actually come from that type of background? Because, kind of part of my own mission, since I do come from a relatively comfortable middle class background with plenty of dysfunction, I might add, as I suppose most families probably have in the real world, but nonetheless, I wasn't ever, in such a dramatic situation where, I was fending for myself or anything along those lines. I guess my question is when, I know you now run these kind of CEO forums. Do you know about the upbringing of most of those? Is it more common that people have actually come from, have had to really work extremely hard to get there and didn't have it easy as kids?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So I've actually written about this before. I like to hire from the scratch and dent aisle because business is really hard. And so you want to find people in and around you who have had difficult things and overcome. Because if you have the white glove approach and you don't know what getting punched in the mouth feels like, I see a lot of those people give up. Mm-hmm. Not all the time, but I see a lot of them give up. And so, yes, I find, for lack of a better term, a chip on the shoulder. Mm-hmm. Like I've always had something to prove, and it was to myself, mm-hmm. wasn't to the world but I had made a promise to myself that I would chase the very best person that I could become. And that's what I've been doing my whole life. And so do I find that in and around senior level leadership and the C-suite? Absolutely. I find it more often than not. It is not silver spoons and white gloves. Mm-hmm. It's people that are out to prove something because they've had some type of tough go of it.
So when you've run companies, so you must have also had people that weren't from the scratch and dent aisle. And, how do you instill, how do you bring up the topic of drive and to get people like that to get more uncomfortable so that they actually do live the lives they really want to deep down, but again, because they've had a fairly comfortable time of it, there's less push?
So I mean, I look at it, one of the most important things that CEOs, senior leaders do is set the culture of the organization. And so when you're setting the culture of the organization and you talk about things like business is hard, we're going to make mistakes, we fail forward, we are relentless in our pursuit even when things get difficult. I mean, I ran a construction company. We went from 7 million to 30 million in 3 years. We lived in pain, right? And so you look at the look in your people's face, and you can tell they're overwhelmed. They're in pain. And so you have to have those continuous conversations about, where are we? I'm going to get you help. And then you backfill on those conversations. But, people who were operating and said, hey, I can only have 20 projects, I can't do any more. Suddenly they were operating with 40 projects and they couldn't do any more. And then they were operating at 80 projects. Mm-hmm. They find ways to get more efficient, and you become the cheerleader. As I've said before, the two things I used to ask myself when I woke up every morning was, how do I make my wife happy? Now I say, how do I make my wife and my kids happy? Mm-hmm. And the second is, how do I serve my people? Because when you take a different approach, it's not a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach about accountability, and your values are really, really clear, right? And so I call it your vision and your values, or the road and the rail. So the road is like, where are we going? That's the vision. You got to paint that really clearly. And then the rails are your values, because you ever have that hollow pit in your stomach where you've missed the mark, it's not reflective of who you want to be and who you say you are, and you go, shit, I missed the mark there, right? You've had that happen, mm-hmm. right? And so, those are your guideposts. And so when everyone's clear about what the approach of the company is, then it makes everything else way easier. But yeah, you have to interview really well. I would tell you, if there's anything that I've done really well over the course of my career, and sometimes very poorly, but it's to get the right people in the right seats and then love them. You got to love your people, make sure they have the tools and resources to succeed, look into their eyes, make sure that they're engaged. And if they're not, it's up to you. It's not up to them.
So you're saying the connection between when you started talking about the construction company and how difficult it was and overwhelming and painful, that what helped people persevere was that you all had values that were aligned, in other words, that you were going in the same direction. Is that what you're saying? And then you've done a good job hiring the right people?
Absolutely, Matt. So, the guiding statement for the company was, wow our customers and treat our people as partners. Because you can't be involved in every decision, right? And so you have to put, here are your guideposts, here are your frameworks. And when that is your framework and someone makes a decision that you feel like is out of bounds in how we aspire to operate as a company, you can have an easy conversation about, help me understand how that was wowing a customer. Explain to me how we were treating our people as partners when you made that decision. And you listen, you listen to their explanation. Sometimes it's, I just missed the mark. But sometimes it's, hey, I had a different approach, and we clarify, and you say, listen, we're going to stand behind you exactly on this topic. You're never going to backtrack. We're going to apologize. We're going to make it right. But next time, here's how I want you to be thinking about that decision, right? And so there's constant coaching opportunities as you go through this and as you go through life, to reflect and change, reflect and reroute. When you look at the genesis of conflict, it's really a disjoint in expectations. There's a lack of clarity. I thought this was the right thing to do. You thought this was the right thing to do. And somehow we need to sync up on that. Yeah. And so there's lots of opportunities for people to do that.
I want to ask you about interviewing, even if many, people listening don't necessarily interview people, they certainly meet with customers and prospects. So on some level, it's no different. You got me curious because you said you felt like it was something you were good at. In what way?
I have always believed that you hire attitude and you train knowledge. Everything is learnable, right? Because if someone knows it, that they've learned it. And so you have to get the right people. It's the Jim Collins, get the right people on the bus. And I really look at the interview process very much. Your background is in sales. And I look at the arc that you go through. And three things happen. Are you likable? Are you relatable? And are you competent? So to say that differently, when the person shows up, do they look the part? Do you feel comfortable around them? Are they relatable? Do you look at them as you're speaking to them and say, man, this is someone who I enjoy. They add to the culture and to the fabric of what it is that we're doing. I'd love to have lunch with this person. I could see myself going to lunch. Mm-hmm. And then the last piece is, can they do what I need them to do in this organization? It's the last piece. People buy from people they like. They don't always pick the right choice, but they buy from people they like. And so if you're in the mindset of you're going to train your people really, really well, and you're going to create clarity so that there's not this dissonance between what you want them to do and what they think they should be doing, boy, you can make a huge impact. What I have learned over time is you have to be incredibly patient to hire what I call tens, on a scale of 1 to 10. You have to hire the tens. Because when you hire out of pain and you make bad decisions and you hire 6s and 7s because they're good enough and they can fog the mirror, what ends up happening is I call it those people can't FSO. 10 people who are 10s can FSO, and that's they figure stuff out. The people who are the 6s and 7s, there's so much hand holding that you need to do with those people. It's not worth your time. It's like getting a shopping cart at the supermarket, and after you get inside, the wheel starts wiggling a little bit. That's the 6 or a 7,
right?
And you think, oh, it's not going to be that bad.
So here's my question: when you're interviewing people, how do you so quickly figure out a person's attitude and that there's someone who can figure stuff out? And actually, let me preface that one step further. Do you have any good questions that you use in interviews to get a sense for that person's attitude?
Yep. So I'm a big believer that everyone should have an interview process. No matter what it is that you're doing, the process that I have personally developed is what I call 5, 3, 2, 1. You get your interview, your stack of resumes. You evaluate them. You find 5 people that you're interested in. You do phone interviews with them. Of that, 3 are going to move on. 3 are coming in. You're having conversations with them. You're looking for people who took the time to do a little research about the company, who understand what it is that you're doing. Because if I have to explain it to you, then the job must not be very important to you. I'm a big believer of marrying up science with the human aspect of hiring, and so we've used Burke reports before. We're using now a tool called Crystal Reports, Crystal Knows, which is on a LinkedIn plugin that I love that. So you marry those things up, and you're looking for people that have the right attitude. Questions that I love to ask is, tell me about a really difficult circumstance you faced in life and how you solved it. When was the last time you were in an argument with someone at work, and what did you do about it? Mm-hmm. And you're looking for things where people are going to bring some resolve and perspective to it. If they can't give you something that was truly really difficult, I would tell you to keep on looking. If they said, I went to my boss and had a conversation with my boss about the difficult circumstance, That's not personally in my DNA of how I want my companies to operate, because people should communicate.
Right.
And so you should be able to go to that person and have a conversation.
So where does the scratch and dent department come into it?
Yeah. So tell me about a difficult circumstance you've had in life, and tell me how you got to the other side. I'm looking for people who are going to open up, right? Because you're going to spend more time with these people than you do with your family. Mm-hmm. And so I want people, when you aspire to live a life of impact, you live big, you live out loud, right? I'm going to have conversations with people that I hope will change their life, will change their trajectory. And I need them to have that reflection back, that they're willing to go a little bit out on the limb, because if you're going to do amazing things in life, you don't do it standing on the sidewalk. You got to get in the street. You got to go run and play the game.
So it's interesting. So you've run companies, and now it sounds like are you coaching CEOs now? Or kind of,
yeah.
Yeah. And so what prompted that shift? Was it, did you feel like it was more aligned? Like, has your purpose in life changed?
No. So when it has not changed. You know, my guiding vision for my life is to help people in business succeed. And the way in which I say that is, people show up every day and they want to be great, but sometimes they don't know the path forward. I've never met someone who shows up to work and says, you know what, Matt, I'd really like to suck today, right? No one ever does that. But the reality of it is they don't know the path forward, and that's where we come in. So my whole life has been spent helping people find ways to achieve at greater levels. And really, when I exited the construction business, which was the last business that I had run for 3 years, I probably looked at 100 different businesses. I'm that guy that people say, oh, you should really talk to Jerry. He can probably help you with that. And was doing business coaching and consulting to various different businesses. And then I had an opportunity to help it scale, which is really what 12 Mavens is all about. It's a business CEO roundtable where CEOs put down their guard, come in, get a little bit of training, and then talk about, here are my biggest issues, challenges, frustrations in my business, and how do we go about solving that? And so certainly I participate in that, but there's 12 other CEOs in the room who have all had their teeth bashed in, and they say, Matt, I faced that. Here's what my approach was, or call this person, they'll be able to help you. They helped me through that same situation. And so you watch people solve problems differently and so creatively, but it's all right in the realm of what I've been doing for my entire career. Just another forum to do it.
That's what I was curious about, whether you've seen changes in the type of adversities that business leaders have, or if really it's sort of the same rotating themes, one decade after another.
So in my experience, it is the same themes all the time, right? And if I just had to pick a few of them, typically your entrepreneurs / your founders are the technical leaders and not the great business people. So scaling an organization is not going to be in their wheelhouse, but the idea of getting something up and off the ground and taking that risk, that's what they're really good at. Solving problems, that's what they're really good at. Probably not very good at understanding financials or how their business actually really makes money. Another challenge that we see all the time is, how do you hire superstars? Because when you have a great team around you, it sure makes business way easier. And when you don't, God, it's not enjoyable. When you don't enjoy the people you work with, you're in the wrong spot. And then the third most common one is time. People become their own worst enemy. And in fact, I just wrote about this on LinkedIn. I'm too busy. It's a cancerous mindset, because it means you feel like you've given up control, whereas you have the whole control. right? And I say this all the time: if you win the mind, you win the day, and that starts with a performance framework, knowing exactly what your vision for life is and your values. And for me, it starts with a morning routine. But those are the three things that I see. You have founder entrepreneurs that struggle with scaling their business because they're not good at operations, don't understand their finances, hiring, and then how do I claim back time because I'm wearing so many hats.
And what do you find the best format is for that kind of meeting? In other words, I think you said something, is it a dozen people? Are they all from different industries? Is it one day a month? Is it 3 days a month, or we 3 days a quarter? Or what do you think is the best format for that?
So I think CEOs are the busiest people on the earth. And so I think taking people out of their business for anything more than a half day is difficult. It's a difficult task. So we do half day workshops once a month. Part of it is fellowship, part of it is training, and part of it is talking about the frustrations of the business and how do we get to better ends. My real vision as CEO for 12 Mavens is really how do we create ridiculously unfair advantages for our CEOs? And so the centerpiece of the offering is always going to be the business roundtable, but we've created an app because businesses don't have problems just once a month, and they don't wait for us to solve them. And so we have an app where you have any number of issues that have come up. We just had one literally 10 minutes before I hopped on this call. Hey, what CRM is everyone using? Because the guy doesn't have a CRM for his business. And so he's going down that path of understanding data and how that can impact his business. We've had issues about firing employees and considerations and separation agreements. And next thing at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, there's 7 CEOs banging away about the best way to separate from an employee. And so we've created lots of opportunities for our people to get better. Last month I was on a call with a New York Times bestselling author, Lindsay McGregor, great author, one of my favorite books, Prime to Perform. But, she did a presentation, and then our CEOs had an opportunity to ask any question that they wanted of her about the book, about how it related to her business. Brett Knowles, who's an expert on objectives and key results, he just did one a couple weeks ago. So we do these calls, and instead of it being, hey, we're going to take you back out of your office, it's a virtual call. It's a Zoom call. Stay in your office, get the quality of the impact. We're going to record it if you're unavailable. And so if it's applicable to your CFO, now we have it recorded, we can share it, right? It's a resource that didn't live just once in a presentation. And so I'm a big believer of meeting our CEOs exactly where they're at, as opposed to telling them what they have to do. That's that whole mindset of how do you serve from the ground up. And, quite honestly, Matt, these are all resources and things that I wish I had,
right,
having sat in a seat, myself.
Yeah.
In fact, when I took my last position, one of the things that I had negotiated in my contract was I had the right once a month to go visit another business, because I thought it was key and critical to get up out of that seat and see how other people were doing it. And that, to me, is really important.
A couple things that have come up in my mind since you've been talking about the format. What about accountability and sort of follow through? So do people have commitments that they make at these workshops that they then report back on a month later, or do they give feedback about their progress through the app, so time isn't taken during the workshop? How does that count? Yeah.
So we start every workshop with a review of the last 30 days. What's your big win? And then the follow through on the commitment they made. So whatever the issue is, when we have finished brainstorming, we ask whoever the CEO is, what are you committed to do and achieve in the next 30 days? And that becomes their action point. And yes, we absolutely check in on that, because who holds the CEO accountable?
Right. Here's another thing I'm curious about. You said something about we don't tell people what to do. And it's interesting, since I've been doing these interviews, I've heard different perspectives on that. In other words, some people who are at the top actually like having somebody, at least in some role, it might be a personal trainer, but somebody that they go to where they don't have to think, and the person just says, right, here's what you need to do, because they almost defer the fact that they're not going to have the time or the resources to figure out the answers. What's your perspective on that?
So I think there's room for both, right? And to me, that line is really the line between someone who's business coaching, which is really just advising, and someone who's doing some consulting, which is really partnering in the business to develop some type of work product. And so, I've gotten to know our CEOs' businesses. I know businesses that I've run. I don't know the nuances of the people and the resources and all of those things. And so I think it'd be incredibly hard, while attractive, I think it'd be incredibly hard to just be told what to do. But partnering in conversations and having really tough conversations with people, that's absolutely the role that you should be weighing in on. I mean, you can't let, because no one questions the CEO. It's very rare, exceptionally rare that the CEO gets questioned. I would tell you healthy organizations do have that dynamic. I think accountability should go up, down, left, right. My favorite book on that is Winning with Accountability. It's about 100 pages. It's like a 40-minute read. I tell people in organizations everywhere that they should read that. They should give it to every person in their organization. Because when you change the dynamic of accountability within the organization and you make it truly so it's up, down, left, right, and you have a humble leader who raises his hand or her hand and says, I don't have all the answers and you're at the front lines. And so you have to tell me when we're missing the mark, because you're going to know faster than I am. And I can fix that problem, but I can only fix it as fast as I know about it. And when you give people permission to do that, it's incredibly powerful.
And is that part of the format of your program, I guess, is to sort of make sure that CEOs do have somebody that's questioning what they're doing? Or is that basically precisely one of the values that they get from being in 12 Mavens?
I mean, that is in my opinion, that's one of the core values that they get. And to the extent that they walk in, and I call it get naked with the group. I think sometimes we live in this Facebook world now where everything is amazing and everything is wonderful. And the reality of it is it's hard. Sometimes it goes really well, and it can go really well for long periods of time. But when stuff gets hard, you have to be able to say, hey, I'm having a hard time with this. And so, the quality of the interactions and the feedback that you're able to get are directly proportional to your willingness to put down your ego and say, I'm not sure, I don't have all the answers.
How do you handle people where you don't think they are getting naked? They're kind of being a bit too superficial about something, and you sense it, but maybe you don't want to make them look bad in front of the rest of the room.
Oh, no, I don't think it's a matter of looking bad. I mean, I'm a big believer ego is the enemy. And so it's never about making someone look bad. It's about getting to better business outcomes. And so when you set that as the expectation of our relationship, that changes the dynamic of how we're going to speak to each other. And so, yeah, if I think you're fluffing something, I'm not going to allow you to do it. And when you watch around the room and the dynamic of a room has really come together, it's, no different than any group dynamics, storming, norming, forming, performing. But when that dynamic is clicking along, the other group members are calling BS before a facilitator is.
Yeah.
Right? And because they'll say, you've talked about this person before. Why have you not fired them? Because it's the wrong person in your business. Right? So why are we talking about this person again when you have the wrong person in your organization? And so you start to see that, and that becomes a fun conversation when people truly have a vested interest in seeing other people succeed.
Yeah. So
Right?
it also sounds like talkers don't do well in the 12 Mavens environment if they're not going to walk their talk. There's not kind of much
Absolutely.
tolerance for that.
Absolutely. I
Right.
mean, it is critical. I mean, the difference between good and great is execution. End of day. You can have the greatest strategy in the world, but unless you get up off your rear end and go execute, which again, I come back to, organizations that are highly accountable are also highly performing. And so you have to put that in there, and you have to create visibility. There's got to be metrics, because what does accountability mean, right? Values have to be clear. Key performance indicators have to be clear. Everyone has to know these are the things that we're pulling on the rope for.
So this is a topic that really, really fascinates me. You know, when you said the difference between good and great is execution, and my first thought is, well, I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is, you know, the information for most of us is out there as to how we can be great. And most people don't follow through much of the time, so they don't become great. And how do you help people, I guess, because to me, some of this is sometimes around things like fear of success, that people are unaware they even have, that they don't want, they're scared to shine too much for whatever reason. How do you bring in the psychology piece to a meeting? Because one of my, this is really unfair, but I've been a Vistage member, I've been a strategic coach, and I think one of the things, and this is again probably just me projecting my own failures on two great organizations, but I think one of the things I don't recall much of was much about the inside job, much about mindset and how, you know, how you need to think differently. Like it's one thing to give people a recipe on what to do, but like I said, most people don't follow through for various reasons. But that's the piece I feel like where perhaps the help, the insight, the guidance isn't so strong. I mean, well, I've got to ask. So how do you start to weave that into your own programs?
Yeah. So when I exited the construction business, I was sitting out on my porch with one of my friends, and Sean looked at me and he said, "You know, I just admire you so much. You've had some level of business success in 4 different industries. You've never been the leader, the technical leader of those businesses. How did you do it?" And I thought, shit, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how I did that. And so it gave me some time to reflect. And so for me, it sent me down a path of starting to write a book. And the working title of that is The 9 Principles of Personal Performance. And that is the framework to me of performance and your ability to execute. And there's elements, you know, to doing that. When I was meeting with, you know, 100 or so businesses over the last 3 years before I became CEO here, the one common denominator, Matt, the very one common denominator, when I would go into businesses where there was some level of disillusionment, I'd ask the question, why did you start the business? Or what do you want the business to do for you? And the people had lost their way. There was no longer a connection to the why of what they were doing. And so, of course, you weren't getting what you want. You were like a leaf blowing in the wind, going from here to there. The best quality lives are ones that are led with intention. And when you do that, again, you change that dynamic. So why don't people perform? Because my answer is they don't really want it bad enough. Like, my why isn't compelling enough to me. I may be saying it because I think it's the right thing to say, and I think that's what my husband wants to hear, my wife wants to hear, my boss wants to hear. But it's not something that gets me up and drives me to go, I am going after this with all that I have. And so I think you have to have a really strong connection to the why of why you're doing something.
And it's funny because I'm standing here thinking, he's probably right. But then I'm also kind of listening to thinking, what was some of that old self-talk I used to have, though, that stopped me before getting to that point, because I do feel like I'm kind of at that point now where what you're talking about in terms of wanting it badly enough. But, other things start to pop into my mind, like the imposter syndrome, in other words, deserving or feeling like you deserve to play with the big boys, for example. For me in my previous speaking career, certainly anyway, and again, I don't want to come up with any excuses here, but more often I was a breakout session. Occasionally I'd be main stage, but typically people would be like, you'd be good for the breakout. Anyway, but I'm just saying, but I hated that role. But the point is how,
So here's what I'm going to come back to, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be a couple pieces we woven into this, but it comes back to the 4 C's, choice, control, create, and confidence, right? And so, the idea that you were the breakout session, that only meant you were the breakout session today. It didn't mean that tomorrow you weren't going to be the keynote speaker, right? And so there's this long journey that we go on. We think everyone's an overnight success. Baloney. You're not an overnight success. There's a process that you go through. And so if you let your ego get in the way, then you'll never get to where you need to go. I'm a big believer. I talk about this in every business I go into. Ego is the enemy. If you start asking the question, what's best for me instead of what's best for the business, your senior leadership team has failed you. I have personally failed you because I have not connected you to what it is that we're doing as an organization, why it's important, and what your role is to help us be successful. So those are things that I just resonate in my core, right? And so, it's like you come back to the scratch and dent or the Eeyore versus, Buzz Lightyear analogy that I use. I didn't choose my circumstance growing up, right? I wasn't in control of that. But I could always choose my attitude and my approach. And so I know that people who maintain a positive and enthusiastic mindset achieve more in life. I didn't know that in the time frame, but research over 25 years, I now know that very clearly. And so, good news, that just happened to align for me. But you look at all of these things, what is the story you're telling yourself? I could have been, as I went into, therapy sessions, which, thank goodness I was identified in school as an at-risk kid and got great help. Just so thankful for that. But, a lot of times you ask the question, why me? Right? And Ellen, just phrased it so perfectly. Why not you? Right? Why is why me the question? Why are you the center of the universe? I'm not the center of the universe. I'm an important part of it because I'm in it. But at the end of the day, right, it's all about these relationships because I've never done anything meaningful in my life alone. But when you start to say, like, put my ego second, that life is a process. It is not like you're on the breakout stage. Yeah, today. Congratulations, you're on there today. It may not be exactly where you want to go, but what are you going to do? What price are you willing to pay to be the keynote speaker? And then chart that path and go do it. Go execute on it. And if it's not that important to you, guess what? You're not going to go do the work to go do it. You're not going to build the relationships. You're not going to build the content. You're not going to do the research where people go, oh my God, I have to have Matt Anderson as the keynote speaker at my conference. And if I don't, it's going to be a disaster. And so it's up to you. Life is so up to you. And I think people constantly surrender control that it's not up to them. And it is. It's always up to you.
It's so funny here because I don't really want to come back with anything in the sense of, the minute I think of something, I'm thinking, well, on one level, that's an excuse, Matt, and you know it, because it does tend to kick in that litany of I guess, whatever you want to call it, negative self-talk or limiting beliefs that tend to kick in, like, yeah, but I don't have enough money to do that, or I don't have enough time, or I've got to do this because that's going to pay the bills, and so I can't afford to outsource, or whatever it might be. But it is interesting. I was listening to Tony Robbins last week, and he made a fascinating distinction. And at first, again, the old cynic in me thought it was, oh, that's just a sales pitch, because he was, it was time to talk about the cost of this program.
Right.
And he said, listen, people always say they can't afford it or they don't have enough time to work on it. He said it's not about lack of resources. He said people's problem is it's a lack of resourcefulness. And then if you really want something, you will be resourceful. You will find a way. You will try something, and even if it doesn't work, you'll try something else, and you'll try again. But you'll figure it out if you want it enough. So don't blame limits like that. So I thought that was really, really interesting point that he raised. One thing I want to, it's going off on something you've mentioned earlier, and it's on my mind because the last person I interviewed was a Stanford economist who just wrote a book about social networks and how most people, and again, I'm wildly paraphrasing, live in sort of boxes and have very limited perspectives on the world because they hang out with people just like them and they live around people just like them, and that limits their opportunities, it limits their behaviors, it limits their beliefs, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. I mean, some of it, anyway, it was fascinating. But there's two reasons I'm bringing this up. One, because it's top of mind, but also because you mentioned a little while ago that when you were running the construction company, you'd take a day a month to see a different business to get a different perspective. And then also when I was looking at your website earlier, there was a line in there, and of course I don't remember it word for word, but there was something that it really caught my interest around the topic of perspective in terms of how it impacts how you, I forget what it was, like either how you see the world or your success in the world. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
So, first of all, I love what the Stanford economist is talking about, because I have found that to be true in my experience just through life, right? And so, most people do not have a favorite word in the English language. I'm such a nerd. I do. My favorite word is perspective, because I really believe that the wider and deeper perspective you intentionally cultivate, the better your quality of life. It's directly proportional. So the better your perspective, the more times you put yourself into unique situations, ask the question, get on the phone and make the phone call. You have a better quality of life. You realize that your way isn't the only way. And that to me is so liberating, because there's not one right way. There's a million ways to do it. And who knows that I may have a really effective way. That doesn't mean that someone else is going to teach me something incredibly more effective. And so you have to be open to that.
So it makes you more open-minded and open to different ways of doing things. How does it help you be more profitable in business?
Well, I mean, it isn't the purpose of every business to solve a problem. And so the only way that you can solve problems better and faster than other people is to crave perspective, to understand the problem differently from many different points of view. And so if you're solving it better, faster, more efficiently, more effectively, I think you get there faster by cultivating that perspective.
It cracks me up because so many of the people I've known in the past and know now, their idea of a good idea is going to their own industry association conference to listen to best practice ideas from other people who do what they do. They probably do, who just get paid more, I suspect. I know. And I'm not mocking that, because clearly many people become more successful in business because of it. But I also find it fascinating that when you read about the best ideas that come up within an industry, more often than not, it's been borrowed from a completely different industry.
100%.
Yeah. So
this one gets me fired up, right? Because you go in and you do business planning with people and they say, I want to grow my business by 10%. And I say, why? You're telling me that you are only 10% better than the whole rest of your industry, and that's only what you're going to do this year, right? And it's incremental thinking that people have. When you are in benchmark mode, you are in incremental thinking mode. When you are in innovation mode, which can only come by looking outside of your industry, you are in exponential thinking mode. And I feel so passionately about that. Because if you're just going to be a Me Too business, that does it slightly better, then you are right to go out of business because someone is going to displace you. There is someone working on an idea right now that's going to displace you. And so if you're willing to sit in the seat and be a Me Too business because we grew 10% and we're profitable. No, you should be disrupting yourself on a constant basis. The only way to do that is get out of your seat and look left and look right. Don't look up and down.
So can you give, and also I'm conscious we don't have too much time left, can you give some sort of specific ideas for listeners about things they can do to get more in an innovation mode?
The first one is you will be shocked and surprised if you were to reach out to companies in other industries that you admire that are doing really, really well, and you send the CEO or whoever the senior leader is a message that says, Matt, I've really admired your work at your company. Would you be willing to take 10 minutes on the phone with me? I have 3 questions that I want to ask you. And it doesn't matter what those 3 questions are, right? Because they're going to be specific to everyone. You will get on the phone with more people than you can imagine. And so you have to do things that are unconventional. Ask people to come visit their work and walk around. Many of the cities around the country, they have a business journal. Look at who the ultimate CEO is. Look at who the 40 under 40 leaders are. Look at who the fastest growing companies are. Go to the Inc. 500 list. Go to the Franchise 500, right? Find people who are out there growing their businesses. It isn't by accident, or almost isn't by accident. They're doing something differently than everyone else, and that's the reason that they're outperforming. And to me, outperforming always comes back to 3 things. They're out strategizing, they're out investing, and they're out executing.
Say that again. Say that again. They're out strategizing. They're what?
They're out strategizing. They're out investing, which isn't necessarily dollars. It could be in loving your people. They're building a culture that just is, insatiably insane, where the connections just work, right? And then the third piece is they out execute. Anyone can have a great plan. The plan doesn't matter. It's whether you can execute it or not. But yeah, the number one thing that I would tell you about innovation is go to other industry conferences. Like, get outside of your industry, because you're only going to benchmark its best practices, not new ideas.
Is it fair to say some industries are more old-fashioned and slow to innovate and therefore aren't the best to go to? I mean, in other words, are there certain industries where you're probably going to learn more than others?
So I think there's value in wherever you go, right? I think it depends on your business, but I look at construction. It was easy to bring some innovation into that marketplace because historically a highly fragmented, lack of technology environment. And so we brought a lot of technology into that business, and it unlocked a world of possibility to us that would not have been able to be achieved.
So you'll typically pick other people's brains that are doing very well, or their companies are growing fast, they're innovators, or you might go to a different industry conference. Are there other resources that you find great to give you innovative ideas? So, for example, one of the people I interviewed yesterday, who's actually also in Denver, the head of sales at a high-end boutique travel company, he said he listened to a lot of comedians, and somehow, I don't know exactly how, but it did something for his brain that it helped him be more creative and come up with innovative ideas.
I love it. I'm a big believer. How much time do we spend in our cars, right? And so turn your car into a mobile learning library. Turn off the music or limit the music, because if you really enjoy it, then use it to refresh yourself. But why not be listening to TED Talks? Why not be listening to podcasts? There is so much to learn. If we think we can solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's thinking, you're out of your mind, right? And so people who have this intellectual curiosity, this drive to learn, they're going to, over time, outperform because their mindset will have changed. Their perspective will have changed from the person who's been in that job for 20 years and has never done the work to cultivate, to intentionally build skills, to see things that are available to you.
Oh, this is brilliant. I can't wait to go back through these notes actually and sort of pull out the kind of next steps. I know we need to wrap up here, so I've got 3 final questions for you. The first one is, since the day when you left home at 15, who have you become?
Who have I become? Oh, man. I've become a better son, for sure, because my relationship with my parents is phenomenal. If anyone out there has someone that they need to forgive, I would tell you it's the most empowering thing you'll do in your life. Who have I become? So I think I had told you there were 3 seminal moments that kind of built my framework when I was a young person. The first was my brother. The second was the idea of choice and the promise I made to myself. And the third was I read an article in the Wall Street Journal. And when they had the larger format newspaper, there was these great articles down the right-hand side. And so the gist of the article was, by virtue of living, you're going to leave an inheritance, even if it's the nickel in your pocket when you get hit by a car. But the bigger question is, what will your legacy be? And so that's the way I have tried to live my life, which is be a really good, nice person, help people, take risks even when they don't work out, and I hope people say that to my son and my daughter.
That's awesome.
At my funeral.
What would be a good first step for people in terms of, although ironically you said forgiveness is I mean, so that's a compelling thing to mention right at the end, is the most empowering thing in your life. I've got to repeat that. First step for people that want to leave a better legacy?
Get clear on the impact you want to make on the world. Right? Why do people feel disillusioned? Because they're not making the impact, but they've also not taken the time to sit down and say, here's who I am, here's who I want to be, and here's the impact that I want to have on the world. Once you have that piece, then you can start pursuing all the rest of it, right? But that, in my opinion, has to be your first step. You have to get clear on why you're here on Earth and the values that you're going to exercise so that when you act, you feel fulfilled, right? So you talk about alignment. You have vision, values, and actions. That's your alignment. And when those things are in alignment, it's your world on your terms, and your chest puffs out and says, I feel really good about what it is that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. But when you don't have those first 2 pieces, or you're acting in a way that's not in concert with them, it's when you go, shit, I don't like the life that I'm leading.
So what's the missing ingredient for people? Because based on a book I read over and over last year called The Big Leap, his argument was the reason people don't take that step is they're afraid that if they do, they'll fail, and they don't want to go to their grave feeling like a failure. What would you say to that?
I would offer regret, right? So I'm a big Stephen Covey guy, right? Begin with the end in mind. Ties into the legacy that I want to leave on Earth. Man, wouldn't it suck, Matt, if you got to your hospital bed at 80 years old and you looked back and said, I never took the chance. Like, I would rather fail. Just fail forward, right? And I think that's got to be the mindset. My daughter goes to a Montessori school, and I was taking her into school. I was going in the back door because she'd had a dentist appointment. There was a big sign that said fail And I was like, oh, that's not very Montessori-like, right? And as I got closer, it said, first attempt in learning. That's all fail is. Who cares if you fail? Yeah. Who cares if you fail? I mean, have you ever had that gut where you didn't take the swing and you got to live with that for the rest of your life? That sucks.
That's really good.
Not trying. I mean, God, I'd rather fail 1,000,000 times, because the joy of the process, and God forbid if you hit it, but the joy of succeeding, I promise you, I mean, failure is like pales in comparison. It's a pimple on your rear end compared to like this enormous thing that happens inside your body. It's crazy.
That's priceless. Thank you so much. Lastly, how can people keep in touch with you or find out what you're up to, and also when your book's coming out?
My wife asked me that question a lot too. So
sorry.
Eventually I will get to it. I'm a little busy building this company right now. Where you can find me at jerrymacnamara.com. That's an easy one. I always get confused with there was a Syracuse basketball player that led them to the NCAA championship with Carmelo Anthony. So it's spelled a little bit differently. JerryMacnamara.com.
Okay.
You can find me on LinkedIn. And I'm currently running 12 Mavens. It's a company that helps CEO outperform the marketplace. And, as I said before, my goal is to create ridiculously unfair advantages. And so if you're a CEO, I would tell you, if it's not us, find a CEO group out there. When I exited my soccer company, the three things that I said was I should have had a business coach, a business mentor, or a business roundtable. And that's on my website somewhere in 2011. That was my biggest mistake as a senior leader. And so it's incredibly fortuitous that 8 years later I have this opportunity to do exactly that, because being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, being a senior leader, it gets real lonely at the top. You look left and you look right, and it's you. And so you don't do anything in life alone. Lean on the people around you. Love your people.
And what's the geography of your business? In other words, where are you open to having groups?
So we are in the process of building groups in lots of different places. And then beyond that, we have the ability to do virtual groups. Mm-hmm. And so in a place, just picking Tupelo, Mississippi, I'm probably not ever going to put a group on the ground in Tupelo, Mississippi, but I know that there's someone in Tupelo, Mississippi that's a forward-thinking CEO that would crave something like this. So we're putting that together for CEOs that are in not bigger markets, because they should have the right to participate in a business roundtable and get that feedback and that experience.
And is this just within the US, or are you open to running them virtually in other countries?
Yep. So our goal is to expand both nationally and internationally. And so we'll be in 66 countries by the time we're finished with this.
Nice.
I'm a big believer in having clarity in the path that we're going. And so if I'm going to achieve it, I have to know what the vision is.
That sounds awesome. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. This has been fantastic. For those listening, appreciate you spending the time. Yeah, the most important thing is you do at least one thing from this to take action on, whether it's around innovation or finding different ideas or hiring suggestions. I mean, there's a lot of different things, different ways to get perspective that can help you grow, whether it's sort of around some kind of, again, mentoring, workshops, or coaching, but just starting to implement some of those things that came up. There's a wealth of different ideas. Otherwise, the show notes are on my website, Matt-Anderson, or matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com, and subscribe if you haven't. Leave a review if you haven't. That would be much appreciated. And otherwise, I'll finish with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.